Hello, my friends, or listeners, or maybe enemies. I am so sorry it has taken me so long to record another episode of Series 4 of Away. My whole story. I had the COVID, and then my husband got the COVID. He got no symptoms, which is sort of amazing because he has lots of underlying conditions. But then I sort of realized that because we are privileged in many, many ways, he's on all the medications he needs to be on. So he may actually have been more protected in some funny way than I. I had minor symptoms. The labored breathing was the scariest for me, but I imagine it's much scarier still for others because I have very mild asthma, but I always have an inhaler, and I'm sort of comfortable with wheezing, or, I know that I can suddenly not have breath. And also, I had a rescue inhaler, which did help with that particular symptom. So I was still lucky overall. I had a slight fever, I think, one day, and not high. And of course, I didn't have to be hospitalized. I got to stay home, and I still worked from home. And so, all in all, for me, grateful. I feel just really lucky. I was not up to the task of recording and then creating a podcast and video. So I apologize. The cough is, I think, allergies, maybe a little cold. I don't know. So I was thinking about what to talk about in this episode, and I was going to write something down and try to be, less sort of stream of consciousness and more on topic. But that's just not me. I am a stream of consciousness person. Much to my husband's chagrin, I think. I very often just say all my thoughts out loud. And I'm a planner, but I plan sort of in my head and then I say it out loud. And I do keep lists because I like lists. They help structure things for me. They're overall very helpful to me. So, but I am a stream of consciousness type of person. I'm at my mother's house now recording because this is where, while Richard and I have been quarantined, I can walk to my mother's house. So I've been coming down here to work because going to the office, I can walk all the way, but it does require public transportation. So it has been better for me to come here where I can walk both ways. And I actually quarantined before we knew my husband had the COVID. I quarantined in her apartment. She is away, so I was very lucky. And now I just come here every day until, we can go back. So going back to my being unable to write down a script for this. I think just like I would not write down my story and read it in an AA meeting. Like, either you're comfortable with public speaking or you're not, but you don't ever do that in a meeting. I see no reason to do it now, except that I sort of lose my train of thought. So I think I left off the last episode with the beginnings of stealing money from my parents. And I may have moved a little bit into my teenage years already, and sort of some of the less than ideal choices I started making. But to hop onto that train of stealing money, I had this epiphany in the last couple of weeks. Well, the epiphany itself was the last few days, but there were some things leading up to it. So the binging, and I think maybe it's doing this podcast, talking about it, getting a lot of old pent up emotion. So you all have to listen to me cry about baby Steph, or little Steph, or even teenage Steph. So I guess about a week ago, no, maybe 2 weeks ago, I got a lock for the refrigerator because I just could not stop the late night binge eating with my own mental power. I'm powerless over this addiction. And it is for me very, very much like alcohol or drug addiction. I have the urge, I have the obsessive thinking, and perhaps because it's not alcohol in part, I'm more likely to give in to this urge because it doesn't have the same immediate detrimental effects or even really the same long-term detrimental effects, unless I were to get back up to my very heavy weight, which at one point I think I've said this, at my worst was like 260 pounds and a size 22. So I got a lock for the fridge, and it's amazing how well it worked. I mean, because it was like, it almost immediately eradicated the obsessive thinking. Because it's like if the thought even came, it's a physical resistor, it's a thing that stops me. But it also is stopping the thinking. And I guess my hope is that with enough time, like, I'll rewrite the neural pathway. I'll rewrite the habit. I will, like, you replace drinking with not drinking. You may replace it with other stuff. But it's like that neural pathway will get weaker and weaker. And at some point, I'll be able to take the lock off the refrigerator and have yummy foods in the house. Right? So that was the thinking when I got the lock and re-hid the treat box. But the epiphany was, and I think this is what came from in part doing this podcast or video, YouTube video, was that the eating wasn't the only part of the habit. It was the sneaking. So my husband's home a lot. I don't have a lot of alone time. My addiction to binge eating started because of food restriction. And I would steal money to buy the food that I wanted to eat. And then I would eat it in secret while my parents were out, usually working, sometimes until quite late at night. So I would have quite a few hours alone. But there was this mentality of, I've got to eat it all before. I've got to eat it all before they get home. I've got to eat it all before my mother catches me. I've got to eat in secret, and I've got to eat it all. And I think that is like, for me, you may have already thought of this, listener, but for me, that was a revelation. Like, oh, it's not just about the food itself, if at this point it's even about the food. And the revelation came because the fridge wasn't locked yet, and my husband was going downstairs for a cigarette. And the minute he walked out, I was like, oh, I'm going to go have another cookie. And it dawned on me that it was like, I'm going to go sneak another cookie while he's not here. And I thought, oh boy, that's it. That's it. He left. I've got to sneak the food, maybe finish the cookies before he gets back upstairs. And so because he's home a lot now with the COVID, it became entirely nighttime eating, middle of the night. Whereas I think before the COVID, like if he was out on a Friday night or something with his buddies, it might be eat all the bad food while he's out on Friday night. But it's eat all the food before you get caught. I mean, that's the basis of it. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is to remind myself of a few things. A, that I'm an adult, and that while there were reasons for this addiction and this problem and causes and people who didn't help along the way, that I'm an adult and it is now my problem, but that I am an adult and I can eat whatever I want whenever I want. So I don't have to eat all the food before someone gets home. I don't have to eat all the food before I get caught. And this was like, oh. So I had that thought when he left, and then I thought, I can leave. And then I checked in with my body and I said, are you hungry? No. I was not even, just not hungry. I mean, I'd had dinner a half hour before, an hour before, and I was full. So I checked in with my body, full. Do you really want this? Or is it just because you're alone for a minute? And, I didn't really want it. And then I reminded myself the cookies are there. You can have them whenever you want. You can have as many as you want or as few as you want. You can have them anytime. And by the way, grown up Stephanie, they'll be there tomorrow too. Because the other side of that, eating all the food before you get caught, before someone gets home, the other side of that is like, I don't know really how to verbalize it. It's all or nothing thinking. So it translates in other ways. Like, I would sort of have these distortions of, well, you're not someone who can keep cookies in the house. So either you have to eat them all right now or eat a few and throw them away because you can't trust you. Because you are so powerless. Because you'll never conquer this, right? So it's this all or nothing thinking with the food, and it's this all or nothing thinking about myself. And this epiphany helped with that too, right? Because it was like, not only do I not have to get all the food in before I get caught, because Richard's not going to catch me. He doesn't care if I'm eating a couple of cookies or even the whole box. I think he cares more when I'm, sneaking it. It's like, ugh. It's sort of embarrassing for everybody. So eat all the food before you get caught or before someone comes home and finds out what a bad person you are for eating all the food and for eating junk food and how you're disobeying the rules. But also about, like, I don't have to eat it all. I can plan for 3 cookies, eat 3 cookies, leave the cookies there. And once I think I've rewritten this pathway and I can take the lock off the fridge and do these things, it's like, that's going to be amazing. That's where I see freedom. On the other side of all this black and white thinking, on the other side of all these thought distortions, that's something Noom gave me. On the other side of all this, it's not about, so I'm not in a place right now where I'm saying no to any particular foods. I'm not dieting. I am using Noom, which I really like. It's like exposure. Like, I'm letting myself have the thing and then reminding myself I can have more of the thing the next day and the next day and the next day. No one's going to get mad at me. Nobody's going to get in trouble. I don't have to sneak it. I don't have to have it before, right? I don't have to have everything before. And also, I'm not so weak that I have to finish the cookies or throw them away. I am strong enough and good enough at this. Not morally good. Like, I have the capability of doing this. Anyway, I don't know if my whole podcast today is going to be about that, my whole YouTube video. Because the next section of life for me is, I think I began it in the last one, is like I start to meet, people from other parts of the city, and I start to make all kinds of different friends, and many of them were very, very real friends. And some of them were not. Some of them were users. Some of them were a little bit abusive. I'm not making excuses, but it was a time when we still accepted a lot of things that we don't accept in 2021 or 2020. Me Too was a long time off. We'll say that. So, for the first time in my life, well, I was about to say something that isn't true, or I don't think is true to me. So I started making friends with kids who went to the public school. So there's George, there's the blowjob, there's the sex is coming into the picture. I'm still stealing money. Cigarettes are coming into the picture. I'm about 13 years old. One of my very good friends had a major crush on George, so I sort of, stabbed her in the back, even though nobody ever told her. Like, it's one of those things that's just Not good. No moral compass. Not, or certainly not checking in with the moral compass on that. But, I feel really uncomfortable with the prep school people, just in general. I just don't feel like myself. And I find a few of them who I feel comfortable with, and those are the kids who are like into graffiti, like their rebellion is graffiti, skateboarding, hip hop. We're talking about early 90s, and that's sort of the real beginnings of great hip hop. So there's an incredible amount of music coming out that is changing the culture very seriously. So there are some of these prep school kids who, like me, love it and find comfort in it and enjoy it, and we sort of find each other. And, people would refer to us as wannabes. But then I also started making friends with some of the guys at the local public schools. I felt more comfortable with them than I did with the prep school kids, and the guys from the local public schools introduced me to some of their other friends from other neighborhoods. And, so I ended up having a sort of a few different groups of friends that weren't prep school. And just sort of doing different things. And a lot of it was great and cool and different and, ahead of its time. But that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for places where I felt like I fit in. And I fit in with a group, I think they were called ABI, Albanian Boys Incorporated, and a little crew that called themselves 357, who hung out right near my house, and they were like mostly Irish American kids and the Albanian kids together, and all of them had tags. If you don't know what a tag is, it's like the graffiti, but it's like your name, your graffiti name, your one name. So of course mine was SEBR, but I wasn't good at it. And then I had friends uptown. The first person I really loved his tag was Menace. And he was an uptown guy, but like a really, really good guy. And then I fell into, some crowds that were a little less good. They weren't bad people. They were people who had grown up in less privileged circumstances, and so were living life the way they could and the way they had seen and had been taught, I suppose. They didn't have all the things I had, and they did what they could with what they had. And some of them had more difficulty checking in with their moral compasses than others. And those are the people I, of course, felt most comfortable with. So, you found me up on 135th and Lenox more often than not. And I had a couple of prep school friends who lived up there who also introduced me to some other people who lived up there. Then I had whatever. I met a lot of people up there. And I did a lot of hanging out up there. And I was in my element. I was comfortable. Now, I say in my story, a lot of my friends then were much older than I was, but I did act older. I looked older. Now when I look back, I'm like, oh, you look like a baby. But certainly my vibe was always older. I'd grown up in a house, as an only child surrounded by adults, always trying to fit in with adults. So I had a personality that wasn't that of a 14, 15, 16-year-old. And I had knowledge and experience that wasn't necessarily that of your average, quote-unquote, normal 14, 15, 16-year-old. Anyway, so, by the time I'm 14, 15, whether it's the corner of 57th Street and 1st Avenue or 135th and Lenox or, 3 blocks from my school at a diner, I'm drinking brown bag 40s, smoking pot every now and then, although I was not a lover of pot. It didn't do that much for me. When I really found alcohol, like not joking around or finishing drinks of my parents or having, like, when I really found it, when I was probably 13 or 14 and with my friends outside of school, or my best friend. She and I were just remembering when she would get home from boarding school. At my house, nobody really seemed to pay much attention to us. I mean, and my parents were way better than her mom, but still, like, it was like benign neglect. And, every Thanksgiving and Christmas, she and I, we had these back stairs. And my parents had given up fighting me on things like smoking, but I couldn't smoke in the house. So I had to go smoke in the back stairs, which, by the way, would not be allowed now because of the ventilation into other people's apartments. But so we would go smoke in the back stairwell and drink in the back stairwell. And in the summer, we'd sneak out. If we were out east, we'd sneak out and hitchhike into town, or, yeah. And she was also a very different sort of friend. So I'm sort of getting all these friend groups. I've got my little, like, wannabe hoods, prep school friends, and I've got my best friend Blair from boarding school, and I've got my uptown friends, and I've got my sort of hoodie from my hood friends, and I'm a chameleon in amongst them all. And as sort of high school progresses, I get more prep school friends, like classic prep school friends, like Gossip Girl type people. And so then I've got that crew, and, I might go to bars on the Upper East Side with them, like the dreaded Awful Dorians, which later in my story has some really bad stuff. And I might leave to go meet another friend in a completely different place. Go down to the Bowery, which is not the Bowery of the 40s or whatever. It's got pretty trendy, but it was different from the preppy stuff. And then I might, spend another weekend on 86th Street, where there used to be a pool hall that a lot of guys from uptown would come down to play at. 86th Street, if you know New York City, was kind of different than it is now. And I would change my outfits accordingly. I mean, if I were going to the preppy bar on the Upper East Side, I might wear a short skirt and whatever was in fashion then, ugly platform shoes. Doc Martens. If I went down into the Village to meet friends there, I might wear Docs and velvet blazer. I don't know. And then if I go uptown, I'm wearing like baggy jeans and my hair's tied up on the top of my head, and I've got purple lipstick on and crushed bamboo earrings. So I'm a chameleon. And I can still sit at a dinner party with my parents and play the grown-up role. Not that I wanted to at that point, but I could. So high school was, when I really discovered alcohol as a social elixir. And of course, at the time, I didn't know I had social anxiety. I just felt less than and different from, which is feelings aren't facts, but some of it's real. I was different from those around me. Just the adoption alone made me different from. And less money then, not no money, even though my mother used to scream about, we're going to be on the street one night. I mean, her fears about money. I have overcorrected that by having no fear, which has been also to my detriment. But, the feeling of having a lot less than others. And I wonder if there was some part of me that felt elevated then when I went into poorer neighborhoods to hang out with people. And I hope not. I hope it was that I felt like we were equals, because I didn't really understand anything properly then. I didn't understand how much I had. I don't think I had the ego or any sort of thinking like that to go into a poor neighborhood and somehow feel elevated. I think I felt the same as, and that's all I ever wanted to feel, the same as someone. And so, disenfranchised communities, that makes sense, that I wanted to feel the same, because I already felt that way. I felt personally disenfranchised. Not literally. There was nothing in my life that was literally, and to be with other people who, on some level, very different level from me, but understood feeling different, being treated differently, all of that. So I think a lot of that stuff was at work in my mind without knowing it. I mean, this is hindsight, right? But if I think about why I would pick particular places and why particular places and people were the best for me. And I probably got less drunk with those people. It was the real drinking as I got later in high school and more sort of Upper East Side-y friends. It's funny because I was trying to clean up my act, but in many ways it got worse because I would drink way more with those people. Because looking back, I felt so much more uncomfortable. I felt fatter than them. I felt poorer than them. I just felt like I didn't fit in at all. And I wanted to. I guess I wanted to in some way. Although now, you literally couldn't pay me to fit in with those people. 10 years sober, and I would be happy never to see any of those types again or have them in my life again, ever. There are undercurrents, quiet, anti-Semitic, racist, all kinds of shit. Snobbery, entitlement. A lot of stuff has become clear to me in sobriety before it even became a hashtag, that I just didn't want that in my life. And that, I've always been someone to speak out against it pretty vocally. And of course, in the last few years, I have, taken stock of how well I speak out against it, and do I do enough? And am I passive aggressive? Am I passive? Or am I assertive about it? And I'm working very hard on being assertive and not aggressive. Speaking out against the things I disagree with and dislike, especially that are going on now. I feel anyway, you can understand that I have real empathy for myself now, thankfully, and for sort of disenfranchised communities, Black and brown communities in our country. And I have borne witness to the kind of racism we finally talk about today. I was remembering this today, that when I was out with certain friends of mine, they would ask me to go hail the taxi. And I was like, what? I remember thinking it was weird, and they showed me nobody would stop. So when nobody would stop for them, they'd hide, and I would hail the taxi, and then they'd all jump in. Now, did we also then jump the taxis? We sure did. But, so whatever. Ironic. Are we proving it's there? I don't know. But I was jumping them too. But yeah, so I saw stuff like that. I saw friends get arrested. I saw, one of my boyfriends, guys I was sleeping with, his mother was Elliot. His mother was a heroin addict. And he got into it and started sharing her needles. And it turned out that she was HIV positive. And then she didn't die from it, but he did. And I'm not crying because he was, a winner and I loved him. I'm crying because that happens a lot to people who don't have the resources and privilege that I had. It happens in my community, but it's a lot less likely. And I'm crying because I never slept with him. And I was at a point in my life where I had no scruples about that. So I very easily could have. We'd talked about it. Yeah. And, so that kind of thing was in my life. I remember going, sneaking out with a friend, an Upper East Side friend, but who also, like me, had a scholarship and felt different from. And, her mom worked 2 jobs. And so we'd gotten together as friends later in high school. You find each other. You find each other when you feel different. And we actually had a lot in common. We had a lot of great nights together, but we also made some pretty bad choices. We were fooling around with the waiters at a diner up on 96th Street and went out to a motel in the middle of, I don't even know, like a motorway in, and played like strip poker with them. I think. I used to remember the name of the motorway inn or whatever it was. I feel like it was in Jersey, but like, what are we doing? I think her mom was away or working, and we spent the night at her apartment during like Sailor's Week. What is that called? I can't remember. And like, I'm in a blackout, and I'm 17. Like, I don't have full memories of this night. A friend of mine in the last couple of years reminded me of it. And I ended up, with a sailor on the roof of her building, and I must have been 16. So, Fleet Week, that's what it's called. So anyway, my life looks like that. Another thing I was doing and I don't know if I mentioned this in the last one, another thing I was doing when I stole money was I was using it to buy gifts for people, mostly for boys, to get them to like me. So at the time, like, Raiders hats were really popular. I think they were Oakland then. So I would buy them Raiders hats or Timberland boots or, a hoodie. And like, that's, when I think back to that, that's so embarrassing. It's like if they didn't want to I would either want them to want me sexually, and if they didn't, I'd buy them a gift, I mean, some really fucked up thinking is the truth. And, I guess I look back on a lot of that and I'm still sort of mortified and embarrassed for little me, for teenage me, for angry, miserable me. And this is the period of my life. I'm very sad about it too, but the humiliation still feels very real. Like when I remember doing those things, it's very real. And so I think, talking about it is huge to make it less humiliating, but also to help someone out there who's made decisions like that and can't get around the humiliation part. Like, I learned from it. Like, I get to use it now, even if it's just to say to someone else, like, you're not alone. I did those things too, and I'm okay. And I came out the other side. This is also probably true that at this point in my story, it's alcohol is starting to save my life, because I was really depressed and I was full of guilt, shame, and remorse. The self-loathing was spectacular. I was not a woe is me person. I didn't understand that. In my house, you weren't allowed to feel that way. I mean, you weren't really allowed to express pain. I started expressing it as loudly as I possibly could, but everything came out of me then as anger. So it wasn't really woe is me. Was it self-centered? Yes. Was I also a teenager? Yeah. So I'm going to dodge that self-centered stuff. I mean, I think teenagers tend to be more self-centered anyway. And I feel like I did have a right to be angry, even though it wasn't really anger. I think in the end it was pain coming out. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but the humiliation part of it is, yeah, I still feel it. I can use that as a motivator not to do things like that again, because I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to put myself in a position where, like, I have a choice now. Now I know. Now I have the experience and therefore the wisdom to not do those things to myself anymore. But in order not to do those things to myself anymore, I had to find some self-love and some forgiveness. And that comes much later in the story. So alcohol is beginning to save my life at this point in the story, because I'm not medicated for what is clearly depression and pretty substantial anxiety. So alcohol is providing a relief, and it's not all day, every day yet. But in social settings where my anxiety is by far the worst, and that means school too, but so I'm living in this kind of constant state of heightened alert and misery at the same time. And so I think that was my medication. I felt it. I knew that I could be in a situation if I had it, a situation that made me very uncomfortable. I think it's So I think, yeah, I wasn't one of those people who remembers her first drink by any stretch. But looking back, I can see it quickly became my elixir for social situations. And then it dawned on me, probably, that, like, subconsciously, that it could be an elixir for all kinds of things. But right through the end of my drinking, I think I used it predominantly for anxiety in social situations. I wasn't someone who, like, sat frequently alone at home drinking. It was always out. So there was some part of me that was craving love and attention and intimacy and something with other humans, but there was also terror of that, right? Which we've talked about in another part of my story. That makes a lot of sense. That there is terror, but there is also need. There is what I think is a biological, I want my mommy scream. And, my mom didn't really answer that call. And I don't want to cry again. I hadn't learned yet that I could find that from other people, other safe people. So I thought that love was in booze and boys and buying things. And I was looking in all the wrong places, but how was I to know? How was I to know? So we'll stop it there. Not that I'm fully aware of where I'm stopping or why I'm stopping, but I will stop there. And yeah. Anyway, so I hoped we went from binges to boys and booze. I hope it helped someone. I hope it helped someone just to understand that all of this stuff can go on. All of these choices can be made. But that also life can be lived, and that you can get through all of it, any of it, one part of it, whatever you're in right now, whether it's you're sober and dealing with old shame and humiliation, or you're not sober yet, or you're sort of testing it out, or you're a binger, whatever the addiction or the root of it, all of that, I'm here to tell you that no matter what, there's a way through it.